Thank you everybody for attending this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're located throughout the US. This is Respect the Inbox webinar series. Today we're going to be discussing reputation. There we go. Respect the Inbox is an acronym that we created. My name is Robert Schweikert. I am a benchmark guide, and today with me I have Lisa Fletcher. Hello.
Hi, folks.
All right, and so for those of you who'd like to join in on the conversation, we would appreciate it. Go ahead and use the hashtag benchmarklive. That way you can follow us on Twitter and join in the conversation. Give us some feedback. It's always very helpful for us to understand where we are. If you have questions for us, you can always ask your questions in the questions box that's located in your control panel. Otherwise, you're welcome to go to Twitter and go ahead and tweet us your responses there. So the first thing here is what is RESPECT? So RESPECT is an acronym that we've created here in Benchmark that is going to focus on the intricate levels of deliverability. And so we feel that these categories here are the top categories for us to discuss and find a deeper understanding of what it really means to have good and successful delivery. So today we're actually going to be talking a bit about reputation, and fortunately for me, I have Lisa Fletcher here with us, and she's actually been our deliverability coach here with Benchmark for a number of years, I'd say, and so she's got some great insight that she and I are dying to share with you guys.
Yes, I'm the one. If you're having trouble, you can reach out to. If you're having drastic troubles, you're usually referred to me. What we're trying to do here today is to try to prevent you from having those troubles by helping you understand what goes into deliverability.
Yeah, perfect. So the first topic we have is domain reputation. Now, domain reputation is very important when it comes to email delivery and how you're actually viewed from the recipient's side of things. Not necessarily from the recipient themselves, but from their spam filters, their security that's in play to protect their inbox. Domain reputation, there are a couple different types of domains that we can work with. There's a public domain, which most of you are very common. It would be a Gmail, at Yahoo, at AOL, something like that. Something that is typically free. That would be considered a public domain. And then a private domain, if you want to kind of explain what a private domain is, Lisa?
That's something that's usually branded. It usually represents the company, the organization, or something that isn't free. Unfortunately, you do have to pay for it, but it's something that you can build your reputation on.
And typically, what would you? How much would a private domain cost roughly?
It depends on if you're registering a domain. The longer you register the domain name, the cheaper it's going to be. You can get it as low as to $4 or $5 if you register it for a few years. If you're only registering it for like a year at a time, it might be $12, $13 to register the domain. Okay. But then after you register the domain, before you can use it with Benchmark, it has to have an email address that you can send from. And if your host does not provide that, then you can get a cheap hosted email domain from Google for Business. It's like $5 a month. And then you can have that address verified, because we do want the email address to be real that you're sending from.
Okay. Perfect. So it's very inexpensive. So that's something that's key to be noted there. Additionally, when you are using a private domain, you are given the ability to manage your own DNS, which is your domain name system. And that's really where Benchmark or other companies similar to Benchmark, where we can give you information that you can publish in your DNS, your domain name system, in the form of these records. And these records can help you help authenticate your emails that are being sent out. So domain reputation. So here we have some examples right here on the right-hand side of some domains and everything. So what is a domain? Now, domain is a web recipient's IP resource, which can be a PC, a web host server. It can be an online website, or any device that's used to communicate via the internet. And again, we've discussed briefly here some private domains and also some public domains. As you can see, a good example of a private domain would be my email address. My email address is robert@benchmarkemail.com, and the domain portion of it is the @ symbol after and then the .com, benchmark.com. And then we would have a public domain. And again, public domains would be at Gmail, at AOL, at Yahoo, those types of things. And then again, both of these types of domains, when you use them as the from email address, when you're sending out an email, they are considered the sending address. Let's go ahead and jump into our next section here. Server reputation. So server reputation, this is also something that's very important, which is a little bit different than domain reputation. And I'll let Lisa kind of explain a little bit about what server reputation is.
So when you send mail through Benchmark, you can be either on one or more dedicated IPs, or you're on a set of IPs called a pool. And those IPs have a reputation, not just your domain, but the IPs also have a reputation. And we want to maintain that. That's one of the reasons why we're giving you this information today. When I'm looking at this slide and I'm not quite catching it. If you're on a shared IP, it tends to be a little slower, but it's a good thing to have if you don't have a reputation yet, to build your reputation. A dedicated IP is something where you're the only one on that IP, and therefore you don't have to wonder if somebody else is doing, it's basically managing the reputation well, because you're the only one on it. Yeah. And it does allow you to go a little bit faster.
So a big difference between shared IPs and dedicated IPs would be a shared pool, like Lisa was mentioning, is something that you're going to have other marketers that are going to be utilizing that same server to send from. And essentially, you'll be piggybacking off of one another. Your sending behavior will affect theirs as much as their sending behavior will affect your reputation. And then aside from that, you can have a dedicated IP where you're solely responsible for your own reputation. So a lot of the responsibility lies in your hands. Your success is at your fingertips. So managing your list, managing your content, really focusing on engagement. These are all different types of things that are going to affect your server reputation. Now, when we think about server reputation and how it's affected, there's got to be a way of monitoring it. And there are several different types of third-party applications that are available. One of the third-party applications that we would highly recommend would be ReturnPath, and they happen to be a proud sponsor of Benchmark Email. ReturnPath is a great resource where you can just simply log on to returnpath.com, enter in your IP address and your domain, and you'll actually get a report from that. And in that report, when we look at your server reputation, it's actually given a score of 0 to 100. And that score is very much like a FICO score. If you perform well, you're going to be desired by inboxes. But if you start to fall back a little bit and you're not performing as strong as you were before, a lot of people are unsubscribing, maybe marking as abuse. These types of things tend to bring down that score, raising the risk of accepting emails by these by your recipient's spam filters. Now, something else to take into consideration with server reputation is speed. Now, I'll have Lisa kind of explain how that can affect your reputation, can affect the speed of sending your emails.
Yes. So if you don't have a reputation, or if your reputation has taken a hit, a lot of times you may want to throttle the speed in which your campaigns go out. That does mean that your campaigns are going to take longer to go out, but it's going to increase the ability to get more emails into the inboxes when you're throttling that, because then they feel like maybe you're not bombarding into you're a conscientious sender, and so therefore you're able to start rebuilding that reputation by slowing the speed down. Now, if you have a great reputation and you're on a shared IP, the top speed is 20,000 per hour. If you're on a dedicated IP, the top speed would be 25,000 email addresses per hour. And if you want to maintain that speed, you want to make sure and manage your reputation. Because some people do like to have those emails land in the inbox at a specific time. Then you just want to remember these considerations.
Absolutely. Now, when considering these different types of servers that you're going to be using and the server reputation, when we do think about the dedicated IP, again, that's really where you're going to have a lot of that responsibility in your hands. So when we think about how you're able to monitor and manage that, we're going to be looking at a couple of main categories here, and it's going to be bounces. High bounces happen to be something that really affects your reputation. Also, it can also be a sign that there might be something that is wrong with either the relays, or your emails could be deferred, and this could be for a number of reasons. We would want to do a further investigation where we're able to pull bounce logs, which are actually responses back from the recipient server stating some type of syntax or some type of code that will either tell us that there's a DNS error, maybe there's a content error. It could be that the recipient server is temporarily offline, something like that. But when we start to see a high number of bounces, that's definitely your first sign. You want to look further into that, and one of the ways of doing that would be to contact your ESP and request to have some bounce logs reports pulled. That way we're able to find out if it's something with sending speeds. If you're a new sender and you're sending a high volume and it's your first time sending, you may find that a lot of your emails might be quarantined or deferred temporarily while they're evaluating the riskiness of accepting mail from you. So monitoring your bounces is something that's very important. We want to keep that generally around 5% or less, preferably less than 5%. If you start to see more than 5% of your list that's bouncing, you definitely want to have a conversation with one of us.
Yep. Now, if you speak with me and you follow, or speak with any of us, if you follow everything that we tell you to do, chances are you're actually going to get your bounces 2% or lower. A 5% is somebody who's managing everything on their own, and maybe they haven't heard about all the points that we're covering today, and yet they still have a decent list. That could happen. But if you follow everything that we tell you to do through the R.E.S.P.E.C.T series of webinars, you're going to be able to drastically reduce those bounces. We want to make sure that you have low bounces, because just the instance of having high bounces, because maybe you have old email addresses or maybe you haven't followed through with one of these other things, can make it harder for you to get into the inbox of the ones you know are good.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you avoid high bounces, and that if you do have high bounces, that it is addressed as soon as possible.
Now, we've mentioned bounces a couple of times here. I'm assuming there's different types of bounces then, is that correct?
Yeah, there's the two types that we're concerned with are hard bounces, which are critical failure. If you see a lot of bounces from a particular domain and you look in your report in benchmark and it says it's a soft bounce, don't worry about those. Those are a temporary failure. Those typically mean that maybe the server was busy or that the mailbox for that particular individual was full, and that will continue to resend to a soft bounce for a couple of days. And usually you can have, in your report, they can be in both a soft bounce and they can also be in the opened or unopened. Mm-hmm. So know that you don't need to worry about the soft bounces.
Perfect. And there's also one other type of bounce, and I don't know if this is specific to benchmark, but we call it a confirmed bounce. And this is actually something that's internal, built into every account, that if we notice that a particular user, or subscriber I should say, has consecutively bounced, then we will place them in a quarantine, essentially, and suppress them from future sends, just to protect you in the short term before evaluating and really deciding to weed out those types of subscribers. Again, high bounces, if you notice that hard bounce continues for more than a few times, even though you've checked all of your DNS records, everything seems to be just fine, it's most likely that that is no longer a good address, and it's best to just weed those people out, reducing the number of active subscribers that you have. And there could be a number of those that you may have to weed out, so to speak, a few times a year, and it's a good practice to be in. Next, we have complaints. Now, complaints are also known as abuse complaints, spam complaints. These would be direct complaints from your recipient. Now, these can come in a number of ways. They can either move your email to the junk or report it as spam. That would automatically give a complaint. They would also be able to manage their subscription or mark it as abuse from the footer of the email itself. And I think that's the only two ways that they can do it, right?
Right.
Yeah. And complaints, these tend to affect you a little bit more than anything else. Now, one of the big things to consider when doing email marketing is utilizing and working solely with an opt-in list that you have procured. What I mean by that is it's something that you've grown as a company over time by using proper means of opt-in, receiving this information from your recipients through sign-up forms, through maybe you guys have done business in the past together, and they've formally given you permission to contact them. If you end up purchasing a list, so to speak, you're going to be running a high risk of getting a lot of these abuse complaints. And these abuse complaints can tremendously affect your reputation. Again, if you're in a dedicated IP, you're solely responsible for your own results. And then if you're in a shared IP, you could be potentially affecting other marketers' results as well by utilizing a purchase list that would have a high risk of getting a lot of these spam complaints. So you definitely want to avoid that as much as possible. We have gray mail here as well. Now, gray mail is a little bit tricky. I've come to understand that gray mail isn't necessarily unsolicited mail. Gray mail is considered emails that are unopened from an opt-in recipient. This is another thing that you want to stay on top of is monitoring the engagement of your users or of your subscribers. What I mean by engagement is how often are they opening? How often are they clicking? Are they engaged with the emails? If you're sending 10 emails, are they only just opening one? Or are they opening the majority of them, 5 or more? Again, with server reputation and sender reputation, having higher levels of engagement really helps boost that score into the high 90s. Complaints will help lower that. Monitoring your gray mail, those individuals who are that are not opening emails that are marked as unopens, you want to really reduce that, maybe push them on a new list. That way you can do like a re-engagement strategy with them later on, but not them in your normal, I would say normal sending habits. And then we have spam traps here. And so I'll let Lisa kind of explain a little bit about a couple of the different types of spam traps there are.
Okay, so if you hit a spam trap, that can mean a couple of things. The two types of spam traps that are out there are ones that were created solely for catching people sending to email addresses without knowing who they are, right? And that means that the ISP or a service created an address and then leaked it out onto the internet, and it was picked up, and they know that that address did not opt in, so they will mark you. You could get blacklisted sending to a spam trap. That's why we request that you have an opt-in list. The other type of spam trap is what results with some gray mail. So if you have somebody on your list and they haven't opened for a while, but you're not monitoring that, then there's some point in the future that the ESP that email address resides on may decide to convert that, if it has been abandoned or closed, to a spam trap. That means that, yeah, maybe they did opt in at one point, but they're not opening your emails. And then all of a sudden, bam, you hit a spam trap because they decided to check the inbox of that address. They do allow a certain amount of time. They realize that you don't know right away that this email address has been abandoned or closed. You may not know at all. Nobody's told you. But if you continue to send to it and nobody opens, that's a clue. So you want to make sure, and if you cannot re-engage these gray mail addresses, to remove them from your active list. If you try a re-engagement campaign and it doesn't work, stop sending to it, because it could become a spam trap.
Yeah. And spam traps, as Lisa mentioned, they can be very difficult for you, causing blacklisting, which can halt all of your email campaigns being sent out and kind of cause a little bit of issues for you, requiring you to request to be delisted directly from whichever one of these spam organizations, or I should say anti-spam organizations. And then there was another type of spam trap as well. I've been told it's called a honey hole or a honey pot.
That was the first one. So okay. That's just another name
for
the ESP creating an email address. strictly for catching people who are sending to it.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and let's continue here. We have some another slide here for the anti-spam organizations.
Before we go forward, can we take a look? I want to see if anybody's asked any questions yet.
Absolutely, yeah, I had that box open.
Yeah, I'd like to know how we're doing. Chat, do we have anything in there?
No questions as of yet.
Okay, that's all right. You don't have to ask them right now. We can answer them at the end. But I just wanted to make sure that you guys were able to see the content and make sure that everybody wasn't having any problems. So let's move forward.
All right. So the anti-spam organizations. Now, there are several different types of anti-spam organizations. They are typically nonprofit organizations that are dedicated to fight and combating spam as a whole. Spam is classified by current trends at that particular time and are collected by each organization throughout various methods. Some of the big names that we see here are going to be Spam House, or Spam House, I should say, and Spam Assassin. Now, again, these are nonprofit organizations, and their whole goal in this is just to keep people accountable, essentially. And if there are people that are performing, malpractice, so to speak, and potentially sending malicious phishing information that could be very harmful to any respected user or a subscriber, it's important that we have these types of companies that are there and we work with them. If for any reason something does happen, and this, in the email world, it's not uncommon for a very good marketer to run into a spam trap. Again, as Lisa had mentioned, it's not typically something that everyone's always on top of and monitoring, but as your list grows, it is something you want to start to consider more and more, especially looking at that gray mail, those people who have engaged with your brand at one point, but are slowly trickling off into a state of where you're sending 10 or 15 emails over the course of 8 months and they haven't opened any of them. It's very important to monitor that, stay on top of that, and remove them when necessary.
And just note that while these are two organizations, this is not an all-inclusive list. There are others
there are hundreds.
Yes. So hopefully you never have to deal with them. They do give you clear instructions on how to be delisted from their lists. But note that if you hit one of these, we will let you know.
So, Lisa, do you have any examples of anybody that you've worked with? We don't have to say any names, anything like that, but I do know that this is, your cup of tea, so to speak, and you do see this on a day-to-day basis. Would you be able to share with anybody some examples of running into spam traps, and then what's it like to get out of it, and how is your mail affected?
Okay, so if you happen to hit a spam trap, you're most likely to be listed, not necessarily blacklisted, but you'll be listed with the organization and all of the associated services that contract with that organization for an updated list every day. It could even be a Barracuda device. There are devices, not just the spam trap organizations, that you could hit something. And if you do, and you get on a list, you do have to go and respond to that. Sometimes you may need to show details on how they opted in, or if you can't do that, in some instances, we may ask you to clean up your list of the gray mail for a certain period of time so you can begin to send again. Now, when you hit that, it's probably going to lower your sender score a little bit. But there are things that you can do to improve it. It does take a little bit of time, but if you're doing the right things, you should recover within 2 weeks. Shouldn't be a problem. So I do see cases of all of those things often. Thankfully, not as much as you would think, but it is because we have thousands of accounts. I will get one across my desk probably every day, and then help you how to recover from that. Now, sometimes it's not in my hands and it's marked on the domain. Sometimes it's on the IP, but either way, if we're aware of it, we're made aware of it, and we will be made aware of it, we're going to let you know and help you work through it.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, shared systems, they do run the risk of having that happen from time to time. It may not be your responsibility at that particular time, and it could be the practices of someone else. and that could temporarily halt or cause some bounces. And typically systems like Benchmark, we have algorithms in place that are designed to try to catch these types of things right when they happen so that we can immediately address them and get you guys back in the green and again provide some remediation and some guidance to getting you guys through that. Now, some of the things to understand with running into spam traps is you can run into them quite a few times, and if you end up doing that, you could be blacklisted, and that could be something that is definitely a bit different than just being on a regular spam trap, but typically that's where it starts. Now, spam traps are email addresses that are strategically used, and that's the important way of describing them, is that they are used very strategically. As Lisa had mentioned, there's a number of different types of spam trap, but they pretty much categorize them into whether you're recycling an email address or if you're phishing or getting a new email address, possibly from a purchase list, something like that, to where these ISPs and ESPs, they know for a fact that that individual that you now have this email address of, they've been inactive for a number of months, weeks, whatever that might be, and they've now assumed that address. So anything new that comes into that, they can assume that that person had not opted in, which would be in direct violation of canned spam. So you want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Let's see here, please. Spammers can be harvested. Okay, so we explained some of the harvesting here. Again, so sending unsolicited emails as well. You know, these are types of things that if you do have a list of subscribers, I'm not sure exactly how you would obtain them, but over time, especially if it's an older list, I know that Lisa and I, we were just talking about this, that some of the lists that are, you know, upwards of 10 years old, if you're not actively monitoring and keeping up the hygiene of the list, that it has a high potential of running into these types of spam traps. So definitely keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I recommend for people to, if they have an address and they haven't sent to it for a few months, that shouldn't be an issue. But if they haven't sent to that address in more than a year, they're running a big risk of somebody marking them as spam. So if you do have addresses and you validate your list, that's another topic we'll cover another day, but if you know it's a valid address and you send to it, you may want to put a note in there asking them to reconfirm. We have something called a permission reminder, and they can click on that and it will record their IP address, and that way you'll know they have reconfirmed and that you can continue to send mail to them. Now, we're not going to automatically stop you from sending to an older address, but if it's more than 2 years old, you're running a great risk.
Yeah.
So at least make sure that you're keeping your contacts engaged. Don't let them sit around, because when you do that, you're losing that money. You're losing the value of that email address. Keep it engaged, because it not only helps your reputation, but then again, you're also always reminding that person that you're still there, and that they may, if they don't take you up on whatever your email is about right away, they may sometime in the future.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that we briefly touched base on in the beginning was an opt-in list. And there's a couple different types of opt-in lists. There's a double opt-in, which is the preferred method. And honestly, that helps protect you. Double opt-in really protects you. So if someone does end up happening to mark you as abuse, which sometimes people just wake up someday and they're just, you know what, I'm going to mark this person as abusing. They may have been opening your emails for the last 6 months and opted in. And if that's the case, and when you can provide some form of proof of that opt-in through double opt-in method, then that'll help protect you in that sense. And then a single opt-in would be just essentially like if, you know, you and I were to speak candidly, and I were to say, yes, follow me, here's my email address. Something like that, something informal. Whereas a formal way of doing it would be logging onto a website, having their sign-up form there, and forfeiting that information. Double opt-in would be then sending a confirmation link to your inbox, requiring you to perform an action, which is subscribing to that list. That's why it's considered the best form of procuring any new subscribers. So blacklists. This is one of those daunting types of topics. You never really want to have this conversation. You want to have the conversation beforehand, before something like this happens. And when it does happen, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. Fortunately, we have professionals like Lisa, who's been in the industry for a number of years, and she's actually worked with tons of businesses on helping them come out of being blacklisted. We call that remediation. And so I'll let Lisa kind of explain a little bit about some of the use cases and what are blacklists, and how did they affect you?
So a blacklist is a list that is kept usually by a third party. For the smaller mail systems, they'll use a third party. For the larger mail systems, they'll have their own blacklists. If you're blacklisted, that means that they're not going to accept any of your mail. If we find that when you send mail, we get a report back in the responses that you've been blacklisted, we are going to address it with you. And usually it's going to be the domain that gets blacklisted. You'll have to address that because they're only going to respond to an email from that domain. If the IP gets blacklisted and it's our IP, it's not a dedicated IP, but you're on a shared system, we will address that for you. Most of the time, if it's a dedicated IP, you're going to need to address that. But that being said, once you've been delisted from the list, it is important to continue to send. We need to address what caused the blacklisting. If you hit a spam trap, if maybe you had too high bounces and they just decided that it was too high. We would address what you're doing by looking at your account, looking at the methods and when you're sending, how you're sending, what you're sending, where you're sending it from. Mm-hmm. Address those issues and then start to rebuild your reputation. Now, a lot of times people will just change their domain and they'll alter it a little bit. That can help, mm-hmm. But then you run into the problem of now you have a cold domain and you need to rebuild it. So a lot of times you don't necessarily need to go that far unless if you want to do something like that, then you will probably have a very serious, your multiple lists you're blacklisted on, you might want to start another domain. If it's not multiple lists, if it's just one, you just want to start to send again and work on the engagement and make sure your bounces are low and continue to send to repair your reputation. Because a blacklisting, the results of a blacklisting, if you send consistently, if you're sending engaging emails, if you're sending emails that people want, you may recover within a couple of weeks. So it is not the maiming that you think it is. It's just a black eye. You will heal.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's very important to address your practices, essentially. That's what I'm taking out of that. And I have run into a couple of clients that have been blacklisted before, and they've done very much that, where instead of addressing the blacklist, they've just decided to abandon that that domain and start with a new domain. And there are some downsides with that as well. Starting with a new domain, you're essentially building new reputation, so you can't really just pick up and go just as you had done prior to the blacklist. So there is some downtime to that. Again, you also don't want to burn the ESP that you're with as well, because then, of course, your account will be completely blocked. Creating subdomains of your own domain, you'll eventually run out of different types of domains that you can come up with. And it's always, in my opinion, always best to continue working with the same domain. And if you end up creating a new branch of your business later on, you'll have a domain available that you can use for that purpose. But for email marketing, in my personal opinion, if you do get a blacklist and you're only listed with one, work with that and recover from it, as Lisa was mentioning.
If you have if you're an enterprise level organization, a lot of times when they first start doing mass mailing, what they're going to do is they actually will create another domain but still has the branding on it and start that way. That way it doesn't affect the corporate mail. But following best practices is always your best course, yeah. Even if you decide to use an alternate domain. And then make sure and manage the reputation, because it's going to work for your branding overall. It's going to help, it's going to maintain that deliverability. And the better you do in the long run is by all of these little points that we give you. And it's really not hard if you've had problems in the past to recover from them. I help people do that every day.
So essentially, it's not the end of the world. Your reputation is something that is going to fluctuate. It's going to improve, and you're going to lose out, and it's just how it is. Considering going on to dedicated IPs, if you feel that your practice, if you're on top of your practices and you're actively monitoring and keeping up with list hygiene, a dedicated IP may be something of great benefit to you and your business in terms of send speeds. Also, the quality of how you're managing or maintaining your reputation is also something that you can place in your own hands. Not to say that shared pools by any means are a bad thing. Lots of businesses, it really does help them in the long run. If a business does take, or a domain does take a hit, sometimes it can be isolated to that domain specifically, as Lisa had mentioned before, whereas it's not always the IP itself. So those are a couple of things to take into consideration. And I think that's just about it that we have for today. I do want to open it up for questions and answers for you guys. So anyone has any use cases or have experienced some issues in deliverability, we're more than happy to help address those today with you guys. So we'll allow you guys just a couple of moments here, and we'll start to address these questions here. So I do have a question here from, it looks like someone here in Texas. I won't say your name or anything like that, but you were experiencing some high bounces when you first started with Benchmark, and you're asking what could that be? Now, again, what we had mentioned initially, when you do start to see a high number of bounces occur, there are a couple of things that we would like you to do first. The first thing would be you can always contact your account manager for them to go ahead and speak with support to pull some bounce logs, because that does definitely help. Also, it will prompt us to do a deeper dive into your account to just look to see what kind of things could jump out. One of the big things that we briefly touched base on in the beginning were DNS records. Now, when you're utilizing a system, an ESP, somewhat like Benchmark, we offer two different forms of authentication. Now, this may sound like Greek to you guys, but we'll explain briefly here. SPF or TXT records, they're designed in a way to help authenticate your emails by publishing the system in which that you're using to send that third party. In this case, if you're utilizing Benchmark, our domain that you would publish would be bmsend.com. You would want to include that within your TXT or SPF record. That way, when you send out an email through our system, we're very transparent as a company. We let your recipients know that we are a bulk email service and that you're using us. Now, they don't always believe that right out the gate. So what they'll do is they'll do a reverse lookup or a query on your domain to see whom you have authorized to send on your behalf. And then there's another form, and that's a CNAME. And I'll let Lisa explain what a CNAME is.
So a CNAME, basically, it creates an alias for your domain. So if you had a record that has basically a CNAME record allows us to copy or make a copy of your domain and have it refer to our server. And it's a little long, but it's super simple to cut and paste. It's called a canonical name, canonical. No, there's no T. Yeah. Anyway, it's a way to create the alias so that on our server, when they do the lookup, it's going to validate that. It creates dual DKIM. The reason why we have you do that alias is because we have DKIM on our servers. But having dual DKIM means that they can check to make sure that that email not only has been validated as the correct sender, there's no spoof there, but that the contents don't change in transit and that they can trust that email. So it builds additional trust. Again, this sounds like a lot of Greek, but both the SPF and the CNAME record are just little strings, and we can tell you exactly what to put in there. We can help you understand why it is written that way, and then in most instances, we can even help you, walk you through adding it to your DNS right over the phone. A lot of times I'll just send it in email and people know right away. I can send them instructions. If you have one of the bigger domain registrars like GoDaddy, 2Cows, or Network Solutions, I have instructions on how to add these. And it's just a little string. But what it does is it builds that trust. So if you're new and you have those in place, it's going to instantly boost your sender reputation higher than if you did not have it. And then when you're starting to build that reputation, you're already starting on a good number.
Yeah, it's basically showing that you are a reputable sender. Those who aren't going to take the time to publish records of the systems or companies that they're utilizing for bulk email serving, then it's going to run a higher risk. Those types of practices are indicative of a lot of spammers. So seeing a high number of bounces initially, if you are sending through a private domain, it can be very well that you have yet to publish any DNS records referencing either the SPF that we mentioned and a CNAME as well. Additionally, if you were experiencing that and you did not have a private domain, it may very well be because you're using a public domain. Lots of spammers and spoofs, they're not going to purchase and register a business domain. They want to be secretive. They want to maintain their anonymity so that they can continue to send malicious content. And spam filters, these algorithms, they understand that. They see that as a practice. And so when they see an email address, like a Gmail or a Yahoo, sending a bulk email to 25,000 or 2,500, whatever it might be, it seems suspicious to them. Those are the types of practices that they'll most likely err on the side of caution and just defer your emails. And that would give you a lot of bounce backs. So I hope that helps address that for you. If you have further questions, I will be happy to address that offline as well. You can always reach us at our 800 number here and just dial extension 1 for sales. And Lisa or myself, we're always more than happy to help address and ultimately get you out of these high bounces and get you back in the green. We are in the business of delivering emails, and we want to make sure your emails are landing in the inbox consistently.
So what's our next topic for our next webinar?
Great question. So this is a 7-week series. It is Respect the Inbox. The acronym is Respect, and I believe the next episode or series that we'll be doing will be Engagement. So that'll be the next one that we'll be focusing on. And stay tuned, everybody. We will have that information posted here shortly. Again, we'll also have this recorded version of today's webinar available to you guys, hopefully in the next 24 hours, and we'll be able to post that online. We thank you guys for your time, and we look forward to seeing you guys in the next webinar.
Thanks.